All right, so here we are playing with Illustrator. Now the reason that whatever I draw, so let me draw the leaf now. Why it smooths it out at all one exact size is because it is in what's called stroke mode. So instead of filling in shapes like cutting out black paper, it instead is drawing a rigid outline around a shape. And you can see stroke looks like a frame, and the fill has a red line through it, which means there's no fill selected. Now if I select all of this, remember I have it on its own layer, and I've locked the layer underneath, so I'm not going to harm this at all. If I select it all, and I change it to be a fill and not a stroke, this is what happens. And I can see the path, but it's all filled in with black, so it doesn't exist anymore. So let's try again. I can take the eraser tool, and now that it's as a path and as a fill, I can erase out, kind of like a brush. This is an eraser brush, my leaf. And it kind of works, right? But not as nicely as it does in Photoshop. And I can work with it. But notice that my brush isn't pressure sensitive here. If I want to change the size of my brush, I have to double click on it and change the size right here. In newer versions of Illustrator, I can change its size based on pressure if you're using a stylus, but you have to set it for that. And I actually have a tilt sensitive one, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So let's see. Now maybe I'm going to make my brush a little bigger too. I can paint, well, that's my eraser. I can paint in a way that is more sensitive. No, not really. So it is not a Photoshop tool. This is all about playing with vectors. So the brush tool is actually one I never use in Illustrator. It's kind of clumsy and awkward. And its default is to be a stroke. So if I change it to a fill, it kind of works, but I'll show you a better way to get that. So instead, let's go with the oldest tools in Illustrator. So I'm going to delete all this. And the oldest tool in Illustrator, and for people who love Illustrator, it's still the go-to tool, is called the pen tool. And that's why it's so near the top. And in the pen tool, you create anchor points, and then you create the line between them. So if I want to make a leaf, I plot an anchor point, and then I plot another, and then I drag out to make a curve between them. And it gives me perfect control. And then I can plot another point, and then the curve between those. And then I can plot another point, and the curve between that by clicking and dragging. And then I can plot another point that I'll have to edit later. And then I can connect it and close the path. Okay? So now I have one closed path made with the pen tool. Now the beauty of that is I know where each of these anchors came from. I designed it in the way that Illustrator was meant to be used. And if I want to get rid of certain anchors, or if I want to modify these handles, I can do that with the small selection tool, the white arrow, the direct selection tool. I can move those anchor points around and get it to be the exact shape I want. Now you can see the appeal of this if I'm going for something perfectly controlled and symmetrical. But it doesn't really work so well for matching the funkiness. I can do it. Illustrator can do amazing things. But for making the funkiness, it makes more sense to use the pencil tool and just draw your funky leaf and let Illustrator smooth it out for you. But you have to close the path. So notice as I get close to the end, there's a little circle that appears next to the pencil tool, and that closes the path for me. You'll notice that's smoother than what I drew. And I'm going to fill it with black. And then I can use the small selection tool and modify points if I want. Right? Nice and smooth. If I have extra points, under the pen tool, you have the direct modifiers. I can get rid of anchor points if I want to. I can also add more in, and I can convert ones that have curves, it's called the anchor point tool, into straights. Just take out all their curves. Or using that convert tool again, I can actually drag out a curve from an existing anchor point. Okay, but now let's see why the pen tool is so favored in Illustrator by some designers. If I'm making a really corporate logo, I'm going to use the pen tool, and I'm going to create 1/2 of a leaf. And I'll start by holding down Shift and going straight down and making a straight line path. And then I go here, maybe about that far up, and I'm going to hold down Shift and make a perfect arc. And then I'm going to go back to the top and I can hold down Shift and make a perfect curve that way or this way, just to get that subtle leaf shape. And then I can use the large selection tool and I can stretch it all out. Right? And now that I have this, I have it all selected with the large selection tool. I can copy it, edit, copy. I can paste it, edit, paste. I'll paste in front. And then I can say object, transform, reflect on a vertical reflection. And then I can use my arrow keys and move it over. Except these are the annoyances of Illustrator. I didn't quite copy everything. I copied everything except that bottom anchor point. So notice it's cut there. So let me try that again. Select it all, copy it, paste it. And I usually do paste in place, which is like duplicate. Then edit, object, transform, reflect, vertical, 90 degrees, okay. Now with the large selection tool, I can hold down Shift and I can fit it perfectly. So now I have in this layer, two paths, right? Showing me perfect symmetry. And if I want a little bit of white space in between them, just use my arrow keys and I can open it up. Now I need a base at the bottom. So let's use a shape tool. This will be familiar to you from our second exercise in the class, the shape-based composition. And because I'm corporate, I don't want a regular rectangle tool, I want the rounded rectangle tool. And I'll make a stem that perfectly lines up. You'll see how these green guides appear that help you line up. And I can select it and I can move it into place exactly as I want. Now if I don't like this, I can use my small selection tool and I can play with it as long as I click outside first and then click on the anchor until it's a white square. That gives me individual control of that anchor point. And then I can modify the shape of the leaf. And I can modify the curves in subtle ways. Maybe I want it to dip in like so. This to dip out more, and this side a little different. Let's do the convert anchor point tool so I can control these handles separately from each other. Whoop. So it's a very different kind of technical way of creating an image. And it's the same way that computer-aided design programs work, like AutoCAD, using these Bezier curves and handles. All right. So you can see that symmetry. If I wanted this to match, I would copy that. I would paste it. I would flip it by reflecting it. I would move it over. And each of these is its individual path that can be turned off or erased or modified. And you can use shape tools as well to build it up. So if I want to do a perfect stump that's based on a perfect oval first, and then I use the pin tool to create the perfect stump, creating anchor points as I go and curving them when I think they need to be curved, in or out. It looks a little weird while I'm building it, but because I'm used to the tools, I know how I can get there. Basically just plotting straight lines until you click and drag, and then you start to get curves. And then for certain things you have to modify. So I go to my small selection tool and I start to work with these curves. Work with these points. Or we use my favorite tool, which is the pencil tool, and once it's selected I can just redraw them like magic scissors. I can even extend them like so. As long as I start and stop on the path, it will add to the existing path. But there is no excuse in Illustrator for anything to ever be sloppy. All of its tools are made for creating something clean and controlled. That's its strength. It does that far better than Photoshop can. In fact, sometimes it cleans things up too much, and in that case, I double click and I say I want it to be more accurate to what I'm drawing, not so smooth. So it's annoying when it takes out the sensitivity of my line. It's just a different type of digital imaging. All right, now if I want to add that leaf, what do? I can extend that line up like so. And as long as I attach it, it will become part of that vector shape. I can even extend it out of this. As long as you understand the principles behind it, it all starts to make sense. And know that everything can be very easily and cleanly modified. And that you have to close all of your shapes. Looking for that circle. How can I close it? It's a little bit of a mess in here now, but that gives me what I need in order to adapt that. As long as it's selected, I can redraw it. Smooth it out. And Command Z, of course. You can go back as many steps as you want, just like a Word document, because it takes so little memory. So let me save that.